Hello, welcome. I'm Kate Mackay, Associate Film Curator here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. We miss seeing you in our Barbara Osher Theater, but I'm delighted to welcome you to our live stream conversation and Q&A about Jill Lee's brilliant documentary Lost Course. If you haven't already seen it, you can watch it as one of our Watch from Home offerings at bmpfa.org, and I urge you to check out our website to take a look at what we have on offer online. This formidable documentary is a comprehensive account of the 2011 grassroots uprising and its aftermath in Wuhan, a fishing village in southern China. The documentary has received many excellent reviews, but just a quote from one of them, writing for the film Stage, Artemis Lin observes that Lee displays a shrewd knack for nonfiction storytelling, knowing what footage to keep and where for maximum impact, and how to keep all the complex moving parts going at a steady pace. And for those of you who've seen it, I'm sure you'll agree with Artemis Lin. It's a major achievement to keep everything moving in this sort of a massive project. She also says, which I love this next statement, the 3-hour film sometimes feels more like a political epic on the scale of Dickens or Hugo, weaving a cautionary tale about democracy, power, and the pitfalls of idealism. And so we are thrilled today that Jill Lee is joining us to speak with Professor Rachel Stern about her film and then to take questions after their conversation. And just a few words of introduction. Lee is an independent documentary director, illustrator, and former journalist. Her work focuses on individual circumstances and choices in the midst of societal change. Lost Course is her directorial feature-length documentary debut, and it was awarded the 57th Golden Horse for Best Documentary Award, also selected for the 2020 IDFA Frontlight Tomorrow's Classics section, and played at numerous other international film festivals. We are also joined today by Jill Lee's producer, Peter Yam, who will be in the background to join in case we need any extra information, and interpreter Helen Choi, who will help make things run smoothly. We are also very grateful that Professor Rachel E. Stern is here with us today. Stern is a professor of law and political science at UC Berkeley and holds the Pamela P. Fong Family Distinguished Chair in China Studies. Her research looks at mainland China and Hong Kong, especially the relationship between legal institution building, political space, and professionalization. Stern is the author of Environmental Litigation in China, a study in political ambivalence, as well as numerous articles on legal mobilization and lawyers in contemporary China. So our structure to today will be that Professor Stern will speak with Director Lee for about 35 to 40 minutes, after which we'll take questions from you in the audience. But feel free to add your questions in the YouTube chat when they come to you, and our moderator will pass them on to our guests. So you don't have to wait to ask your questions. So right now I'll turn things over to Professor Stern, and I'll move into the back row where I'll watch. So thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Kate. And Jill, it's wonderful to meet you virtually. And congratulations on the film. As Kate said, it's a remarkable film. It's shot over the course of 8 years, and it's a tremendous accomplishment of longitudinal documentary filmmaking. It's unusual to see a film that follows its subjects for this long and really takes its time. I think this is where the epic comments come in, to show the viewer the complicated legacies from a protest that received international attention, but sitting here in 2021 has long since fallen out of the international spotlight. The film has for those of you who haven't seen it yet, has a really interesting diptych structure, where the first part deals with the protests, and then the second part is about what happens after the protests. And as someone who studies social movements, that's where things get really interesting, is in the complicated aftermath and legacies. So we'll get to that second part, but I just first wanted to talk to you about the process of making the film. Can you tell us how you came to this project, or when you heard about Wuhan and what it was, about what you heard that made you think that this was something that you wanted to take on as a creative project?
首先我希望問嘅是想問問，首先想問一問咧，就係其實你係幾時聽到咧烏坎呢件事件咧，同埋呢件事係點樣會令到你係覺得係值得去做呢一個紀錄片嘅咧？
其实那个时候我是香港的记者，然后当时我刚做 video journalist 才3个月，然后对我刚做 video journalist 才3个月，然后就被派去采访这样一个乌坎这样一个事件。我记得我当时是在香港出发，然后去深圳，然后坐了一个长途的巴士去到乌坎的镇上，然后村民们去接我。当我们进入到村口的时候，我就看到有人用 walkie-talkie 说 "I'm sorry"， 对，我当时是一个 video journalist， 刚做3个月。
好，那个时候我其实只是一个刚sorry I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just working for Hong Kong media at that time, and I was a video journalist who had joined the media for 3 months, and then I was sent to Wuhan, and then I distinctly remembered when I set off from Hong Kong, past the borders to Shenzhen, and took a long long bus trip to Wuhan, and then when I arrived, there were villages. There waiting for me, and then I saw them holding walkie-talkies and talking to other people.
Yeah. 然后他们就说记者来了，记者来了。然后当那个车进入到他们正在三坝的现场，然后他们就开始喊口号，就像大家在影片一开始看到的那样。
那我是oh yes, when they used walkie-talkies to communicate with each other and saying that reporters are here, and then when I arrived at the village, I saw the crowds were already there, and then they started chanting slogans.
就像大家看到的那样，他们开始喊打倒贪官，还我土地。然后当时因为我非常的新，所以我基本上就是没有时间去 process， 然后立刻就被当时的气氛去感染到。
And they were chanting down with corrupt officials and then return our land to ourselves. And because I was a newbie then, I was overwhelmed, and then I didn't have the time to process what I was perceiving.
然后我记得当时就是像大家看到那个信一样，就是有男人、女人，老幼都同时跟你传递同一个 message 的时候，那种力量是很震撼的。
And then, like in the documentary, when you see them, men and women, old and young, were chanting the same slogans, it was very overwhelming, and then the impact was great to whoever there was.
所以我感受到一种我不想停机的本能和冲动。
Therefore, and then I instinctively felt that I couldn't just stop recording at all.
对，我只想继续拍，然后拍更多。
And then all I wanted is to take more shots, and then to take it nonstop.
然后所以也是这样一种本能的冲动，让我继续去拍摄，不管中间是我当时任职的媒体没有在派遣我们进去，我也会自己进去，或者是之后也就是辞职，然后继续去拍这样一个影片。
And then it was this kicking in of instinct which urges me to continue my project, regardless of whether other media have left already or when they were not present. I just wanted to carry on with the project.
因为我当时任职的媒体只需要是3到5分钟的短片而已。
What I thought was the media there were only looking for a report of about 3 to 5 minutes.
所以就是这么开始。
And that's how I started.
但是我非常幸运的是，我基本上是在我第一次进城的时候就遇到了我的3个主要的人物。
And I was really lucky that when I first went into the village, the first 3 persons I met were the 3 protagonists in my documentary.
像那个建新和烈红，就是 Sing and Hong their name inside the film。我第一次见到星的时候，他是在现场，然后他拿着一个摄影机，穿的身上写着 police 的衣服，然后穿着一双靴子，存在感非常的强烈。当时对我来说。
And then the first person I met were Hong and Xin. And then the first time when I met Xin, he was holding a camera and wearing a police vest and boots, and then it gave me quite an impact.
Only a T-shirt.
A T-shirt with a print police on his chest.
Yeah, it's not a real one. 然后红呢，他就是在现场在做一些组织性的工作，所以对我来讲，他的存在感也很强烈。
And then Hong was organizing the activities at the area, so that he made an impression as well.
然后过了1、2天的时候，他们就蛮神秘的，想要带我去见另外一个德高望重的人家 Miss Lin。
And then a couple of days later, they were acting really secretive and brought me to someone else, and it was Mr. Lin.
他们告诉我这是他们的领导者。
And then they told me that Mr. Lin was the leader of the protests.
然后他们都在继续相处的过程当中，他们都非常的吸引我。
And then the way we interact, they drew me into the plight.
他们同时也是3个不同的世代，3个 generation。
And then they were representatives of the 3 generations of activists in the village.
同时因为他们很明显，我们可以看到他们身上的那样一种明亮的一面，人性上明亮的一面。
And then they were very evidently demonstrating the brighter side of humanity, if I may.
但同时也很感恩的，就是慢慢的，他们没有在我的镜头面前，去避讳那个相对比较晦暗的部分。
And I was very grateful that as time passed, they didn't refrain from showing me the darker side of the activities.
这一切都让做一个记录的长片有了可能性。
And then all that made a documentary possible.
A feature-length documentary. 所以这是这件事为什么会发生的原因。
And that is how it happened and why I was motivated to do the feature documentary.
And of course, it never occurred to me that it would take me 8 years to finish that.
That's really a powerful story. At the very beginning of the film, of course, you have the shots of the protest, and it's very moving to see a protest on that scale. So it gives me a little bit of an echo of what you must have felt seeing it for the first time.
那就是我看到開場嘅呢個時候，我終於睇到咧就係同一時間咧，我睇到嗰個畫面咧都係感受到咧你大概咧會感受到嘅情況啦。咁所以我都明白你嘅嗰個處境。
當時我自己其實也會有一種很強烈的感覺，覺得說他們的見識格局是完全打破了中國主流社會對於中國打破了主流社會對於中國農民的刻板印象。
And then I was feeling very strongly because what I saw was breaking the stereotypes of what mainstream society thought about the Chinese rural organizations and how villagers react to issues.
That was one of my reactions as well in seeing that footage, was it's really unusual to see protests on that scale. in China with that level of organization, as you said, across the 3 different generations, and with everybody out in the street shouting the same message.
咁咧亦都係呢個係我自己嘅感覺咧，就係咧見到咁大規模咁有組織嘅示威活動咧喺中國內地進行啦，咁亦都見到咧係3個唔同嘅呢一個年代嘅人咧，佢哋咧一齊團結起嚟咧，就係表達咧同一樣嘅訴求。
One of the things that I heard you say was that you didn't want to stop filming. And I wanted to ask you about the moment you could have easily ended the film with your protagonist, the protesters, winning the elections. Can you tell me about the moment of deciding your decision to keep filming afterwards and to have the whole second half of the film, which is about what happens after the protests? Was that instinct as well? Was that a hard decision to make?
嗱，佢咧就話咧，你其實咧你就係話有呢一個主動咧就去呢個拍攝啦。咁其實咧你唔想停止啦，咁其實好簡單，你可以咧就喺佢哋咧贏得第一次選舉嘅時候咧就已經停機㗎啦。咁我想問下，有乜嘢去推使你去繼續你第2部分嘅拍攝咧？係因為嗰部分咧係相當令人哋感覺到有趣。
因为首先就是像他们口号像讲的，上半部分只是完成了口号的一部分，而第2个部分是在下半部分才正要去开始，所以我没有理由在中间停止。
Because the first part of the documentary, they were only successful in only half of their demands, and then the other half of the demands weren't fulfilled at the end of the first part of the elections. So there is no reason to stop rolling.
同时，对于纪录片来讲，进入日常是一件很重要的事情。
And then for feature documentary, going back to the usual is a very important process.
对我来说，当媒体的聚光灯离开了之后，
And then I thought that when a spotlight from the media has left,
人们真正会面临到什么样的困境、什么样的挣扎，才会更加明显的浮现出来。
And then what struggles and difficulties people faces only comes out after that.
而且我一直以来都是对人更感兴趣，我的摄影机也是跟着人物的动线去拍的。
And then I was more interested in people and their connections, and that is how I proceeded with my camera.
所以我很想知道他们接下来会面临什么样的困境，然后他们会如何去抉择，这就是我的兴趣点的所在，所以我没有理由在中间就停下来。
And then I was really interested in seeing what adversities they have to conquer, and then how they make their decisions. And then it is very interesting for me to observe, and that is why I don't have a reason to stop my camera.
That makes sense, of course, that this is, and what's so valuable about your film from an audience perspective is it's one of the few moments when we get to see what happens after the media coverage goes away. The challenge of filming for 8 years, though, is you end up with a lot of footage. And so I wanted to ask you about your editing process. I understand that you spent also a long time in the editing process. I think Peter told me 3 years, if I'm getting that right, and that the first cut of the film was just over 8 hours long. So I wanted to hear about how you managed to get from that cut to this cut, and because this was your first time as a director, what you learned in the process of making the documentary film.
其实3年是第2个阶段的剪辑，不是全部的事情。
In fact, 3 years was just a second stage of my editing process. It wasn't the whole process.
你问的这个问题确实很棒，因为它 editing process 就是我在整个过程当中最挑战，然后最繁复的一个过程。
And then This is a great question to ask because it is true that editing was the most challenging and the most tedious part of the whole process.
事实上，我在2016年的时候有一个已经非常接近完成版本的100分钟的版本。
And then in 2016, I had an edit which is very close to this one, which is 6 hours long, 100 minutes.
当时已经开始进入后期的制作，
And
调
then
声调色。
And then we were going into post-production periods, like adjusting the colors scheme.
但是我就觉得那个版本有什么东西不对劲，可是我当时讲不出来原因是什么。
But then when I watched that, I felt that there was something not quite off, and that I wasn't able to pinpoint that.
所以最后就决定说要把那个版本放在一边，然后从零开始看素材。
And then I finally decided to put that aside and started watching raw footage over again.
然后看了一段时间之后，就发现说，哦，我找到了原因在哪里了，让我觉得不对劲的原因在哪里。
And it was quite some time before I finally realized what the problem was.
就是我发现我自己是有一种外来者的投射。
And then it was the feature documentaries was made by projecting my perspective into it.
Like somehow like outsider perspective. 为什么这么说呢？就是因为当你看到他们在做一件非常难的事情，你不由希望他们能够得偿所愿。
And then it was because when you see someone facing such great challenges, of course you really wanted them to succeed.
然后在潜意识里面，我就因此会产生了一个滤镜，一个 filter， 将带有一些反高潮的footage， 就是把它移走。
And then it was because of this that I put into a filter and then weaned out the less dramatic scenes of the documentary.
然后我觉得这样一种unconsciously filter 是不恰当的，对于这样一个复杂的影片来说。
And then I thought the subconscious filtering of footage is not appropriate.
所以我就要重新寻找方法，怎么样来重新做剪辑，因此又花了后面的2-3年的时间。
And then I decided to find a new way and from a new perspective to edit it once again. And then that's why it cost another 2 to 3 years.
所以最后我们找到了一个我认为是恰当的方法。
And finally, I was able to find something which I thought was appropriate.
如果我用画一幅画来比喻这个方法的话，
If I may to use a painting analogy,
我其实所做的就是把每一个角色的颜色调准确调出来。
it is to project each and every one of the protagonists in their true essence and their true colors.
那什么是他们的 true color 呢？就是我会将在极端情绪下说的话拿掉。
And then what is the true colors? It is to wean out the more dramatic and more emotional words that they spoke.
比如说在极端的亢奋之下所说的话，或者是在极端的恐惧之下所说的话。
For example, like outbursts while they were ecstatic or when they were under extreme fear.
我会把这些部分拿掉。
And then I would just cut them away.
因为我拍了很多的素材，所以同一个人在一段类似的时段里面，他总会在不同的场合讲过非常相似的内容。
Because the footage I obtained was so much that the same person would have said under a very short period of time, under different circumstances, said something which was very similar.
所以我就会保留那个更贴近他本意的那一次所说的话。
And then I chose what I thought was the more appropriate and near to what their true essence was.
然后当把每一个人的颜色都调准确了之后，这样把它一层一层的叠加起来。
And then when I was able to find out the true colors of each and every of the protagonists, I layered them into one solid piece.
然后这幅图画就自然而然产生了一个他自己的纹路，他自己的色调。
And then this, the compilation of this painting would have revealed its true characters and goings.
自然而然的产生。
And then it comes naturally.
所以并不是说我先想好我要画一幅什么样的画，然后让我的人物来服务于我。
And that is how I proceeded. I didn't want to make preconceptions of my protagonist and then paint a painting in which they fulfilled my expectations.
当然，判断的标准是在于这么多年我跟他们相处，对他们的了解。
And then how I make that judgment was through the long period, the years I have interact with them, and then how I knew about them.
但是很重要一点，我要不断提醒我自己的，就是我所看到的仍然是局部的。
And then but then I still have to remind myself repeatedly that what I saw and what I filmed was just part of the whole.
因为当我越开始，就是当这个事件越蔓延，然后我继续去拍摄的时候，我是很战战兢兢的，因为我看到了它的复杂和多变。
And then as the incident proceeded, I was very cautious and was very intimidated because of the complexity of the issue.
所以我很担心我个人的不管是知识的限制、精力的限制，或者是视觉的限制都好，我担心我自己的限制去限制了本身这个题材的丰富性。
And then I was really worried that the limitations of my understanding, my knowledge, and my perception was limiting the complexity and the full-bodied emotions portrayed in the incident.
所以这是我坚持为什么要将自己的投射拿走的原因。
And that is why I was very insistent in trying to remove my personal perspective from the documentary.
我相信这样子的话，才能够让这部影片可以打破时空的限制。
And then that is how I thought would be able to make this documentary filled with universality and then will not be limited by time or place.
然后让不同可能来自，就像把一颗原石磨成钻石一样。
And then that is how that is like trying to make a piece of rock into a diamond.
然后让由不同的带着不同知识背景的观众，带着不同经历的观众，由于他的经历，让他看到了其中的一些面向，跟产生连接。
And I hope that people, audience from different backgrounds and then with different knowledge and then with different perspective would be able to see something out of this documentary.
所以这是为什么我坚持它是full of layers and capacity 的原因。
And that is why I insist that this is a documentary that is full of complexity and layers.
That's such a lovely description of your process. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's so interesting. I mean, all that complexity and all those layers completely come across in the depiction of all these different people. But it's also kind of an ambitious goal to try to capture somebody's true colors. And I just have to ask, have they seen the film? I mean, I would be terrified if I were watching a film about myself that was supposed to show me my true colors. I have to ask, did they feel that what was their reaction to the film like? Did they feel like you got them?
我不确定他们看过没有，但我相信可能没看过。
I'm not really
They
sure.
haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if they've watched it, but I believe that they haven't.
然后我觉得就是可能我们彼此之间是会有一些，包括他对我的摄影机的信任也好，或者是相处的信任也好，我觉得可能他们也可以感受到，在拍摄的过程当中，我并没有去 judge 他们。
And then I think that with the trust with the trust in my camera, what I filmed, and me as a person with the long periods of our togetherness, they are pretty sure that I wasn't judging them with what I was doing,
不管他们做什么，
no matter what they did.
所以我相信，彼此之间是会 we can feel each other， 然后他们可以感受到这一点。
And then I think that we were able to feel each other, and then they knew my sincerity.
然后因此他们在我的镜头面前展现出不同的面相。
And that's exactly why they projected themselves fully in front of my camera.
That intimacy and that trust that you have with the protagonists of the films is so palpable. And it's really interesting for me to hear the word non-judgmental, because that must be a quality that you brought to the project that helped with that dynamic of trust. I wanted to bring in a question from the chat because it's so directly relevant. Someone is asking if you have any idea why you were so immediately taken into the confidence of the protest leaders. From the story you just told, it sounded like it was almost instantaneous that you had this trust with them. Do you have any thoughts about, first of all, what is is that true? I'm sure the trust deepened and became thicker over time, and we'd love to hear about that. And also, if you have any idea what contributed to this trust, if there's something about your identity or the way you interacted with them that helped create the conditions for this intimacy.
佢想問一問咧，就係呢個係網上嘅問題啦，就話可以見到咧，你係一開始咧就好快咧就同你建立到信任啊，咁係唔係啦？咁而我哋見到呢個信任咧，就係隨住時日嘅增加咧，係繼續係去加深嘅。咁想問下，你覺得點解佢哋會咁相信你咧
？Good question。我都好想知點解。
I would really want to know 。
但是其实前后是有一点不太一样的，因为在上半部分一开始我确实是一个记者当时，然后我也需要比较快速的出片去给我的杂志。
This is a good question, but then there was some slight difference in the first part and the second half of the documentary. In the first half, I was in fact a journalist for media, so I have the same considerations like trying to put out a story as soon as possible for the media I work for.
虽然我对人是更感兴趣，但是拍摄到的依然会是在事件中的他们。
And then, even though I was more interested in people and their interactions, but then my focus in my work was to demonstrate what was happening, the narrative of the story.
所以如果你说一开始的信任，也有可能是基于他们对媒体的信任吧，希望媒体把他们发生的故事带出去。
And so that's if you have to say that there was trust instantaneously, it was more likely that the villagers were very trusting of the media and was hopeful that the media would be able to broadcast the story.
那接下来的相处，在下半部分更多进入到日常。那我每次会停留的时间要更久，会在他们的日常生活里的存在感要更强烈一点。那个部分可能就会进入到对个体的信任吧。
And then on the second half of the documentary, I stayed very long periods in the village, and then I interacted with them more deeply and then in longer periods. And then that is why the trust solidifies, and that it was more of a person-to-personal trust.
因为我是 One Woman Crew 拍摄的时候，
By then I was doing it all by myself,
然后
single-handedly.
Yeah, One Woman Crew， 所以会更加的灵活一点，所以我会尽量希望，不管是上半部分也好，下半部分也好，我都尽量希望是可以待在他们家里。
And because I was working as a single woman crew, things are there is more leeway for adjustments, and then I can stay longer and then try to interact with them more, and then I try to make a point in staying at their home.
其实讲到上下部分这种角色转换，有一点蛮有趣的可以分享。
And there was something quite interesting to see the difference between the first half and the second half of the documentary.
因为在上半部分记录的是4到5个月的时间，但下半部分记录的是4到5年时间。
And then the first half was depicting the incidents within 4 to 5 months, whereas the second half was 4 to 5 years.
所以在上半部分的时候，抓时间点是比较容易的。
And then the timeline was easier to assemble in the first half of the documentary.
所以我会知道大概选举是什么时候会举行，或者是某一些具体的活动大概什么样去举行。
I was able to plan beforehand when elections will be held, and then when things will happen.
等到下半部分的时候，进入日常，其实很多事情你是不知道它会何时发生。
But then by the second half of the documentary, things go back to the usual pace. I was unable to anticipate when things will happen.
甚至哪怕当事人可能都不知道。
And then even the protagonists themselves were unable to fathom whether things will happen.
所以他需要去撞，有的时候你需要的是等待。
And then you have to be there when it happens, so you have to be very patient and wait for it.
所以他们之间的调性会不一样，或是相处的方式也会产生一些变化。
And that is why there is some differences in how to interact with the villagers.
That's really interesting. I had noticed that the second half and the first half felt different, but I think it's a tribute to your editing that the pacing didn't feel that different. Like I can imagine that it could have really run out of narrative drive in the second half. It could have really slowed down, and I didn't feel that. So there's also choices in how to craft it so that the first half and the second half feel somewhat similar, even though of course they're totally different in terms of the raw footage that you have.
对，时长是。
你说？
In fact, the first half and the second half were almost the same
1个半
length,
小时。
1.5 hours.
Yeah, they're almost exactly symmetrical or parallel. I wanted to ask you about the title as well and how you came to select it. Of course, the film, as you've said, is about people trying to make choices in a difficult situation. The English translation is Lost Course. In Mandarin, it's Mihang, which is something like drifting off course. And for a film where you're really determined to push the audience to make up their own mind about these really complicated people in a really difficult situation, I felt like the title was a place where you were telling us a little bit about what you thought. The title seems to suggest that they've lost their way, that the idealism isn't quite ready. It doesn't quite reach its fulfillment. And I think it calls on us to reflect on the limits of change through social movements in contemporary China. So I just wanted to ask you about that. Is that the right interpretation of the title? Was it hard to pick a title for the film? How did you come to it?
就想問咧，就係你其實佢覺得咧米行呢個片名咧就係佢哋去做唔同嘅決定啦，咁就向咗唔同嘅方向行啦。咁你係好努力咧，咁去令到呢一個觀眾咧去自己去決定咧，究竟係佢哋選擇嘅。咁亦都覺得咧係唔係其實米行個名咧就係你自己對於事件 嘅了解，你係咪覺得佢哋係走散咗，同埋表示咗近代中國對於社會變革嘅一啲限制？
其實這個名字是到剪完了的時候才想到的。
In fact, the title came up after the editing.
但是它類似的一個感受是，在我剪到就是在接近結尾的時候開始感受，在拍攝到結尾的時候開始感受到。
And but then I have the feeling, I have kind of a feeling of how the title should be by the end of my filming.
其實在我看來，迷航是指當這個航程開始之後。
What I thought was the meaning of lost cause was after a ship set sailed.
在船上的人，哪怕每一個人都清楚自己希望這艘船所去的方向。
Despite everyone on the ship was very determined and clear about where the destination is.
Yeah, their own idea. 但是仍然沒有一個人可以說出這艘船將最終去往何方。
But then nobody in that ship would be able to be certain that where the ship would end up.
它的方向和結果是由船上的每一個人去決定的。
The direction where the ship sailed and then the end was determined by each and every one of the players in the ship.
由他們有差異性的價值、信仰、觀念，甚至是包括人性層面上更加複雜的這種亢奮、恐懼、應激反應、慾望等等。
Each and everyone has their own different beliefs, ideas, and concerns, and then even it is affected by some more dramatic sides of humanity, like extreme fear and emotions.
由這一切去產生一個共同的作用力，去影響這艘船所去的方向。
All these factors juggled the direction of where the ship goes.
所以對我來說，這個旅程是充滿了張力和未知的。
That's where I felt that this journey is filled with intensity, conflict, and uncertainty.
而在烏坎的這一艘船上，不同意見的、不同想法的村民，還有各級的政府，還有我們這些外來去的媒體，或者是學者、研究者，甚至是在當下，在那一個時候，關心他們的所有的人，都共同的在這艘船上。
And the ship, the crew of the ship contains not only the villagers, who had different opinions and then ideas, and then their own goals and aims. The ship's crew also contains different levels of the government, the media from outside, academics, and even the people who were really concerned about the issue.
都共同產生了一個作用力。
And then each and every one of them played a part in juggling the direction of the ship.
既然我們講到了迷航這個片名，我可以再分享一點我什麼時候找到了這部影片的結尾。
And then I would like to share the title, how it came up with the title A Lost Course, and with an anecdote of at the very end of my filming.
就是這部影片的找到結尾的時候跟這個片名的關係。
And then it is the relationship between finding the end of this documentary and its title.
我找到結尾的時候就是在紐約的街頭。
And then I found the end of the film in the streets of New York.
當時我的人物紅，他去紐約 Trump Tower 前面去呼籲國際社會的關注。
And Hong was organizing protests right outside Trump Tower to ask for people's attention to the plight of Wuhan.
那个时候是2016年的年底，
And it was the end of 2016.
川总统是刚刚第一任上任的时候
And Trump was elected president.
的第一任期， 第一个任期。
And then yes, this is he was elected for his first term of presidency.
所以当时在那个街头看到的是，周围就是充满了川的支持者和反对者。
And then the streets were filled with both supporters and protesters of Trump.
事实上，他们更关心自己彼此之间的医术，并没有给我的人物太多的关注。
And then each and everyone had their own concerns and issues to take care about, and then they didn't pay much attention to my protagonist.
对，所以当时我站在那里，我好像看到了另外一个迷航的开始，就是我感受到了东方不仅东方在发生巨变，西方也在发生巨变。我好像看到了另外一个迷航正在开始，而我们所有人都走在上面。
And then right there in the streets of New York, I realized that we might be going into another lost cause, not only the one depicted in my documentary in the East, but also maybe happening in the West. So we might be, the whole world is getting onto a ship of lost cause.
所以当时我觉得我找到我的结尾。
And that is where I've realized I found the ending of my documentary.
That's lovely. It was an interesting moment for me watching the film too. Of course, the Wuhan protests are so consequential for the people of the village. They were such a big deal for those of us who pay attention to Chinese politics. And then to see Hong on that outside Trump Tower and to see nobody paying any attention, to see the whole subject of this documentary shrunk to a tiny little point is also an interesting and nice ending point as well. Just to zoom out from the documentary in that way. I wanted to invite people who are watching to type in their chat questions if they have them. Now is the time. I have some more questions of my own as well that I'm happy to fill in with. I wanted to make sure to ask about gender. One of the strengths of the film is the ensemble cast and how it tracks this group of activists, all of whom are fascinating individuals in their own right, and the shifting dynamics between them. But I couldn't help but notice that there are no women who are main characters in the film, although of course women were involved in the protests, and some of those women appear in the film at various points. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about that. Was that, I assume that was reflective of the leadership of the protests themselves, but I wanted to hear about the gender dynamics in the village and the role that women played first in the protests and then in the subsequent elections.
虽然我的3个主要人物都是男性，
Even though the three of my protagonists were all male.
但是我拍了另外一个第二梯队的人物，
But also I filmed a second tier of characters.
里面有女性，比如说超的姐姐，
And there were women like Chao's sister
或者是波的女儿，
or Bo's daughter.
对，她们也是可以在这个过程当中看到她们的能力和魅力。
And then in the process, we can also see the capabilities and their charisma.
同时在更多的群像的镜头里面，我们也看到女性也非常的前面。
And then in a lot of the group footage, we can see a lot of women were in the very front of the protest.
我相信在就是在这个地方跟大多数的地方一样，仍然是男性为主导，并没有超越50-50这样子的比例。
I think this is a place where, like a lot of the places in the world, that participation is mainly by men, and then 50-50 participation is not reached.
但是在这个村庄里面，我觉得相比其他的 case， 女性的参与度是更高了已经。
But comparatively, compared to other places, I think in Wuhan, women's participation is more pronounced.
我还可以分享一个小细节。
And then I would like us to share with you a small detail.
在他们的选举当中，因为每一家规定了，如果每一家都当选的话，每一家只能有一个人当选。
During the electioneering periods, it was decided that every family can only have one person in the village council.
所以在这个过程当中，最超的姐姐其实也蛮活跃的，可是她就在其中的一个阶段就退选了。
And then it was, in fact, we were able to capture that Chow sisters were very proactive in the organizing of activities, but then she dropped out because her brother was winning.
因为他们是同一个家庭。
Because they were from the same family.
同时，我们也可以看到，当最后当选的时候，其中有一位女性。
And then we, at the same time, we can see that the candidates who were finally elected, there was a woman.
她是John，她其实也在抗争的过程当中做了非常多很实际的事务性上的工作。
It was Zhang. She was in the whole process of the incident. She was very active, and then she worked on a lot of the administrative side of things.
这只是一个补充。
And this is what I would like to add.
Thanks. That's really helpful in terms of understanding the broader context. I have a question from chat. Someone wants to know if there's any documentaries or films or other artworks or even works of literature that inspired you or influenced your approach to making the documentary.
想問問，其實有喺當中有冇咩其他嘅紀錄片啊，或者係劇情片啊，或者係任何嘅文學嘅作品咧，係啟發你去做今次嘅紀錄片咧？
我想最啟發我的，塑造我的創作觀的是我犯過的所有的錯誤。
I think what inspired me and then encouraged me to be what I am today was the mistakes I made in the past.
因为之前有很多个版本，特别是我讲的2016年的版本，其实里面有非常非常的错误，但很幸好在 editing 的 process 我可以不断的调整我自己。
As I've mentioned before, a lot of the edits like the one in 2016, there were a lot of flaws, but I was very lucky to be in the editing process to find them out and then took them away.
曾经有尝試使用過倒敘的方法，或者是各種更加看起來增加 dramatic 的一些剪輯的方法。
I was thinking about putting the end first, or to do it present it in a more dramatic way.
甚至曾經也，比如說誰是愛國者1號，然後用過這個做開始。
Or maybe just to review who was patriotic number 1.
比如說在月黑風高的一個晚上，有人開着一輛小摩托車，然後去拍傳單，但是村民並不知道他是誰。
Like in the first shot, like in the darkest time of the night, someone was riding a motorcycle and distributing leaflets without the villagers knowing who he or she was.
或者是使用過更加強烈的音樂或者是空鏡。
Or to use more dramatic backup music or sound effects or more dramatic scenes.
但是呈现出来的效果，你会觉得 它反而冲淡了现实的力量。
But then you find that these gimmicks or ways of presenting it, in fact, diluted the intricacies of the real issue.
我觉得那某一种程度上来说，也是新导演想要证明自己的一种投射或者是欲望吧。
I suppose that was what a new documentarian wanted to show off her talents and her capabilities.
所以对我来讲，找到合适的方法，是因为我犯过了很多不合适的错误。
And the way to find the proper way to do it was to find out that there were a lot of improper ways that I did it.
比如说，我也试图曾经就是去尝试去 push 我的人物。
As an example, I did attempt to nudge my protagonist.
就是我并不是一开始就很顺利的形成了我的创作观念。
Because how I wanted it to be presented to the world, I wasn't very determined.
但是像这一类的素材，在剪辑台上就会觉得很奇怪。
But then it felt unnatural when you added it into the documentary.
然后你把素材往前一拉，拉到前面，你就会发现说，诶，这里我有刺激过它。
And then you try to look into the raw footage, and then you saw that before the soundbite, you've nudged him and tried to insert him into a soundbite.
所以令到他讲出不符合他自己的不太像他平常的观点或者是光谱的话。
And then that makes his soundbite not jutting out from his usual demeanor or ideas.
所以这一切这一类的 footage 最后都没有出现在大家现在看到的迷航上面。
That's why all these nudges were finally added out from the documentary.
所以我犯过了无数的错。
Yes, I made a lot of mistakes.
但如果说到我自己喜欢的影片的话，
If I have to say, if I have to talk about films that I like,
我喜欢保持复杂程度，保持各种 layers 的这样的影片。
yes, I prefer the more complex and layered presentations.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about that 2016 cut of the movie, and in comparison to what I saw, the more understated version. In the version I saw, there, I think perhaps taking out some of the more obviously dramatic moments gave space for some of the quieter dramatic moments. Like, I'm just one viewer, but I was genuinely surprised to find out who Patriot number 1 is. And then there's another surprising moment where Hong disappears and nobody knows where he went, and they're speculating. And then I was surprised to find out he was in New York. And then there's some real dramatic moments of intimacy between you and the different protagonists. One of the most moving moments for me is when you're talking to Lin in the second half of the film, and he's reflecting. He compares himself to a Chinese emperor and talks about how lonely his time in power has been. So I would say that there's quite a bit of drama in the movie that you did make. It just is happening in a more understated key, perhaps, than the first cut that you made.
我亦都好感受到咧，係呢個而家咧係低調嘅呢個處理啦。咁其實咧當中咧比較戲劇性嘅地方就唔係喺一啲好激動嘅過程中，而反而咧喺一啲安靜嘅環境中咧個張力咧係更加大。例如咧當中譬如宏唔見咗嘅時候，大家即係大家就好怪奇去咗邊啊？咁原來咧佢去咗紐約啦。咁而呢一啲咁嘅比較，大家可以比較親密同埋睇得透啲咁樣去檢視條片。咁亦都咧有一樣嘢咧，我就覺得咧你同呢個阿林祖戀佢有一個訪問就係佢喺度以自己以寡人比喻自己啦嘅寂寞啦。咁其實你條片咧係有 係有佢嘅戲劇性同埋張力嘅，只不過係一個安靜嘅張力，而同埋係一個低調嘅張力嘅。
所以佢都冇問問題。
係啊。
Yeah.
Well, I think we should probably wrap up because we're just about at exactly an hour. But I just wanted to thank you for the conversation. And this conversation layered on top of this film adds to my enjoyment and understanding of it. So thank you. And thank you particularly for sharing your process with us. That was really interesting to hear about.
May I ask for a favor?
Sure.
Here's our email address. So if the audience, if you have any comments or review and you would like to let us know, please send the email to this email address.
Can you put it up closer to the camera? Oh, no, it's backwards. How?
Oh, it's
Oh, it says,
lostcoursedoc@gmail.com.
okay, great. Lostcoursedoc@gmail.com.
Yeah.
It will mean a lot to me. Thank you.
Well, I just like to thank Jill for being here and taking the time to talk about her amazing film. And thank you, Rachel, for really having wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Helen, for your interpretation, and Peter for all his support, and Justine and Nat behind the scenes. And, I would just encourage anyone who's watching who hasn't seen the film to watch it. It really is incredible. And now I want to watch it again because of all Jill's comments on how it was constructed. And it just really is remarkable, the integrity of your vision, and also the clarity of your vision and what you wanted to achieve, and how you managed to achieve it. It's really a remarkable accomplishment. So thanks very much to everybody for their participation in this talk.
Thank you.